Sound check, sound check. Mayroon po ba akong sound? Ayun, meron mo. At may background ng aking mic. Meron siyang... Sige natin. So, we are here now in Module 3 of nstp. Reading. The Module 3 is Understanding Filipino Value System. So welcome to the Module 3 of nstp 1. This is part of the module will tackle value, philosophy, Filipino values, values adopted in Philippine culture, and key values that dominate in Philippine way of life. At the end of this module, we will be able to, number 1, comprehend Filipino values and Filipino value education. Number 2 is cultivate a deep sense of commitment as a true Filipino. Number 3 is concretize the strength of Filipino characters. Number 4 is identify foreign values that influences Philippine culture. Number 5 is evaluate the dominant values in the Philippine way of life. So, Filipino value and philosophy. So, what's the Filipino value and philosophy? Ito mahimik. Filipino cultural values are widely held belief which make some activities, relationships, goals, and feelings important to the Filipinos, Filipino people's identity. When uh, when these Filipino values collapse and mesh in a mutually supported system, it is called Filipino Value System. The content of the values are the Filipino myths and religion, while the structures are the Filipino oral and written traditions, churches, sacred places, temples, and mosques. The Filipino internalize these values of their culture and thus create from themselves a world of meanings. A Filipino experience family closeness and solidarity o yung pagpapahalaga sa pamilya. Politeness, use of po and opo, hospitality, tuloy po kayo, depth of gratitude, or we have this what we call utang na loob, that is subjectively and emotionally unlike a non-Filipino observer. Social scientists or psychologists who studied Filipino values objectively from without or from a distance. Such values as social acceptance or the pakikisama, amor proprio, economic security, or yung tinatawag din natin na pagmamayari, and trust in God, o kaya naman yung tinatawag din nating paniniwala sa Diyos, bathala o may kapal. Find their philosophical basis in human's dynamic openness toward nature and the world. One's fellow human and God. This dynamic openness of human is openness to the possibilities of the future. That is why values are something to be realized. Human values are not mere private. All values have social aspects. The government officials who demands percentage, the fireman or policeman who is involved in extortion for a service which is duty all contribute to the worsening gap and corruption. We are responsible for one another. Father Vitaliano Argurospe, a religious priest in the Order of Society of Jesus, cited that the late President Corazon embodied that all that a Filipino wanted his or her president to be credible, honest, just, with a strong faith in God and in her people. The ideal type of Filipino model during the parliament of the streets was religious, people-oriented, and nationalistic. The heroes of EDSA placed the good of the Filipino people before the safety and security of their families. They were willing to risk their lives for God and people. So, it is from the NSTP Book 1, 2015. Filipino Values. Nature, constellation, and context. The Filipino value system arises from our culture or way of life. Our distinctive way of becoming human in this particular place and time, we speak Filipino values in a fourfold sense. First, although humankind share universal human values, it is obvious that the certain values take for us as distinctively Filipino flavor or Filipino flavor. The Greek ideal of moderation or meden agan, the Roman in medio stat virtus, the Confucian and Buddhist doctrine. Buddhist is doctrine of the middle. Find their Filipino equivalent in Hindi, labis, hindi kulang. I'm sorry. Find their Filipino equivalent in hindi labis, hindi kulang, katamtaman lang. Secondly, when we speak Filipino values, we do not mean the elements of the Filipino values are absent in the value systems of other peoples and cultures. All Filipino eat, talk, and sing, but they eat different food, speak various languages, and sing different songs. Thus, we easily recognize Filipino, American, Chinese, Japanese, or any other foreign food, language, or music. The differences lies in the way these elements are ranked, combined, or emphasized so that they take on distinctively Filipino slant or caste. For instance, in China, honesty and hard work may rank highest. Chinese and Japanese culture give great values to politeness and beauty. American culture to promptness and efficiency, and Filipino culture to trust in God and family-centeredness. In this sense of value ranking and priority values, we can speak of dominant Filipino values. Thirdly, universal human values in Filipino context, historical, cultural, socio-economic, political, moral, and religious take on distinctive set of Filipino meanings and motivations. This is true not only at the aims and goals, belief, conviction, and social principles of the traditional value system of the lowland rural family, but also calls the Filipino nationalistic tradition of pagsasarili, pagkakaisa, pakikisama, pakikipagkapwa-tao, at pagkabayani. A Filipino value is this value or this value, I'm sorry. A Filipino value or this value does not exist alone, in isolation or in vacuum. Filipino values like bahala na, utang na loob, hiya, pakikisama, pakiusap are clustered around core values like social acceptance, economic security, social mobility, and are always found in definite context or set of circumstances. Both positive and negative these values together form a characteristic constellation. In school, studying and praying, storytelling and game, envying and gossiping, which differs from configuration found. In government offices, unity, heroism, intrigue, show of power, bribery. In business firms, word of honor, finesse, commission, kickbacks, grease, money, and also bribery. In the barrio, honoring, comforting, cooperation, come what may, gratefulness, shame, and show of power. To change a framework of values, it may be necessary to change the constellation and context of those negative values that hinder Filipino and Christian movement, Filipino and Christian development. Fourthly, we can speak of Filipino values in the sense that the historical consciousness of values has evolved among our people. The Filipino concept of justice has evolved from inequality to equality and to human dignity from the tribe to the family and to the nation. Filipino consciousness of these different values varies at different periods of our history. It is only in the last two decades that Filipino people have become more conscious of overpopulation and family planning, environmental pollution, and wildlife conservation, and the violation of human rights, active nonviolence, and people power. Philippine values ambivalence and split-level Christianity. Filipino values are ambivalent in the sense that they are potential for good or evil, a help or hindrance to personal and national development depending on how they understood, practiced, or lived. Filipino values have both positive and negative aspects depending on the context in which they are found. In social system or atmosphere of extreme insecurity, the positive qualities of the Filipino take on negative and ugly appearances. For example, depth of gratitude or utang na loob can lead to appeal pakiusap, nepotism, and cronyism. The possession of power and their abuse could lead to class distinction. Shame can become insincere. Machismo is partly responsible for the querida system and the doble cara morality. To show the ambivalence of Filipino values, one example is to suffice. Take the well-known but ambivalent Filipino bahala na mentality. On the one hand, this Filipino attitude should be the root of the positive value of risk-taking, entrepreneurship, and social responsibility. The positive meaning of this virtue of risk-taking is enterprise and joint trust in both human effort and divine providence. A person's will to take chances and risk, no matter what difficulties and problems the future entails, is necessary for a nation's growth and destiny. Bahala na could be genuine faith and trust in divine providence that also presupposes a self-reliance that took the form of the people power in EDSA revolution. Bahala na was a positive and nationalistic virtue for Jose Rizal, who believed that Filipino could no longer rely on the Spaniards, but only on themselves and on God. On the other hand, in the past, the negative aspect of bahala na, which dominated Filipino life, meant a false sense of resignation. Ganyan lang ang buhay, bahala na. A superstitious belief of blind faith like malas or swerte, tadhana and kapalaran, or escape from decision making and social responsibility. As such, it may be the root cause of national apathy, walang pakialam, and collective paralysis of action. Bakit pakikilos? To solve both local and national problems, everything is already predetermined of fate. Negatively, bahala na could endanger the false sense of security blanket. For example, if God wants Filipino families to have plenty of children or anak ay kayamanan mentality, God will take care of everything. Bahala na. Bahala na could be the cause of the absence of a national initiative of that discipline required for national growth. When negative bahala na prevails, nothing ever gets done. Potholed roads, uncollected garbage, countless unresolved murders, carnapping and smuggling remain year after year. How many have been arrested, convicted, or jailed for wanton murder for the notorious graft and corruption? A sense of national frustration, helplessness, and despair grips the nation and the power, and the people no longer care. From a Filipino perspective, what social reforms are necessary to reform or to transform bahala na positively? No society will long endure unless there is justice. Unless the system of reward and punishment exists and is effective, if in the Philippine society lying and stealing people's money are rewarded and truthfulness and honesty are punished, what else can one expect but a badly broken political will for a nation reform? The government should therefore prioritize an effective system of universal sanction for those who hold power. From a Christian perspective, the Christian doctrines of divine providence, creation, stewardship of land and property, and the conservation of our natural resources remain the challenge and task of parents, educators, and Christian evangelizers. Split-level Christianity or double-standard morality, the immorality and hypocrisy of many so-called Filipino Christian is a scandal to both Christian and non-Christian alike. It is important to distinguish between pseudo-Christianity in all its varied forms and authentic Christianity, between bad and good Christian. We must also take into account the ambiguity of any religious commitment, which is not something made once and for all, but a long life process which demands constant conversion and renewal. We must also distinguish between Filipino actual and normative behavior. This is between what is and what is ought to be. Filipino values are not static. They are not simply what they are, but dynamic. They become. From historical perspective, the question to ask about Filipino value is, this is how we were. How are you doing now? Ganito kami ngayon? Ganito kami noon? Paano kayo ngayon? How are we how are we to know towards what goal or direction Filipino values ought to move or become? According to Father Vitaliano Gorospe, a religious priest in the Order of Society of Jesus, we need both external, structural, and internal cultural change. It is here that the Christian faith should. Philippines values strength to Filipino character. So what's the strength of the Filipino character? We have these close family ties. To a Filipino family comes first, and family is everything. They live with it and depend on it. Their dreams and aspirations and life are always centered on their family. This family solidarity keeps a Filipino to be positive amidst everything. They work hard to ensure a better life for their family. Family is evidently highly valued in the Philippines. Thus, the government also strengthened Filipino family and in great support to ensure work-family balance. Utang na loob or debt of gratitude. Filipinos always recognize one's indebtedness. This means that they owed for a person who has helped them through the trials they had undergone. They repay that person in whatever time and situation. It is one way of showing deep appreciation from lending out a hand. We also have here hiya. It is a Filipino value that is difficult to translate. Literally, it is several meanings such as shy or timid. We have this sensitive rather than ashamed. Filipinos believe that they must live up to the accept standard of behavior and make it a point not to cause another person embarrassment. Each is anticipated to have a hiya in the way they behave to win respect from the community. This is the value that gives Filipino a sense of social decency and politeness. Another Filipino value, this is the pakikisama. There is also no exact English translation of this word. It means getting along with others to preserve a harmonious relationship. It invites the Filipinos to do well and to be nice companion. The value of pakikisama results in camaraderie and feeling of closeness to one another. Pakikisama also sharing one's wealth, talent, time, and self with fellow human being and working together for a common good. This value bridges the gap between cultures. We have here also the respect to others. Filipino regard others with dignity and respect. This is being observed in the basic sense of justice, fairness and concern for other fellow men, nature, or animals. The above values are the root of many other values. Close family ties makes a Filipino a hardworking and industrious person. A Filipino will do anything for their family that also make them optimistic, flexible, adaptive, and creative. Hiya, pakikisama, utang na loob, and respect to others makes a Filipino an individual with unique moral obligation to treat one another resulting to community ties. These values makes Filipino friendly, hospitable, polite, and loyal. In brief, the Filipino core values influence how they behave in any situation. The Philippines is recognized in having collectivist culture indicated by close family ties and community ties in society. Filipino values are centered at preserving social harmony, motivated mainly by the desire to be accepted within the group. This makes a Filipino reliable person that can easily integrate and work with anyone, anytime, anyhow, and anywhere. This is from the book NSTP 1, 2015. Values adapted in Philippine culture. Sociologist Robin Williams identifies 10 values which are central to the American culture. Since the United States controlled the Philippines as a colony and thus influenced its culture, these values are adapted in the Philippine culture. Number one is equal opportunity, which the society should provide everyone with the opportunity to be successful. Number two is achievement, and success are encouraged by competition so that the person rewards reflect his or her personal trait. Number three is material comfort. Refers to making money or once we have this, our first impulse is to buy symbols of wealth such as house and lot, automobile, jewelry, and others. Number four is activity and work. We tend to prefer action to reflection and try to accept hard work than accept our fate. Number five is practicality and efficiency. When what is preferred as practical and not theoretical. Today, our educational goals have tended to focus on the practical courses, which means those that bring money or those that bring in money, such as nursing, computer programming, etc., over that medicine, engineering, and law. Progress, the preference for products which are identified as the latest, therefore the best. This is emphasized in commercial ads. Number seven, science. Number seven, science. The recognition of the works of science expert as the source of knowledge, at the same time giving less attention to emotion and intuition. Number eight is democracy and free enterprise. Reflected during election when we emphasize our needs and choices. Number nine is freedom. The belief that individuals should be free and to pursue one's personal goals with little or no interference from anyone else. Taking this in dogmatic sense, in Metro Manila, drivers stop and park anywhere they prefer, back up with the notion that interference should be given to their being able to pursue their earnings capabilities. Number 10 is racism and group superiority. Individual rate others according to sex, race, ethnicity, and social class. Sino nakaranas ng racism dito? Like, for example, if you are from Bulacan or from Manila, medyo racist ka pagka yung kaklase mo nalaman mo na Bisaya. So, hindi ko na-experience to pero alam ko may mga ganong pangyayari. Next, key values that dominate in Philippine way of life. Number one is non-rationalism, rationalism. The philosophy implied in non-rationalism is the idea that people have to adapt themselves to nature and the forces outside themselves. Non-rationalism involves an uncritical acceptance, reverence, and protection of traditions and rituals. There is a resistance of scientific methods on unswerving loyalty to the group and unquestioned obedience to authority. Rationalism is the belief that one can actively control and manipulate his or her destiny by systematic planning, studying, and training. A person is thus greatly responsible for determining his or her success or failure. The traditional, the, the rational person is future-oriented rather than present or past-oriented. His or her thoughts and actions are scientifically oriented and continuously guided by curiosity, observation, and experimentation. He or she gives high priority to self-expression and creativity over group conformity and security. Filipinos are influenced by Western rationalism. Although they are still fundamentally non-rational, they view the world as one over which they have little or no control, lying success or failure, largely dependent upon supernatural being or spirits. This is reflected in the expression bahala na. This fatalistic outlook rests on the strong dependence on the spirit to care of everything to for everybody. Filipinos often says this expression when about to perform a particular task that is difficult to accomplish. Like for example, pinagluluto ka ng amo mo ng pagkain pero hindi mo alam kung paano. Sasabihin mo na lang bahala na. Although this attitude also prevails when undertaking any task from the simplest traditional manner of performing household chores, planting and harvesting crops, using and maintaining water and forest resources, up to the more complicated setting up of business enterprise. Other Filipino expression of this Orientalism are phrases such as itinilaga ng Diyos or God's will, iginuhit ng tadhana or destined to be, gulong ng palad, wheel of fortune, malas or bad luck, and napasubo, forced into something. Ano bang bago ngayon? Matagal na kasi 2015 pa to. Anyway, studies reveal that child-rearing practices in Philippines emphasize obedience to elders. It is said that Filipino is authoritarian, even dictatorial. When given power and flaunt to everyone the fact that he or she is the boss. This stifles initiative, self-reliance, and sharing of ideas among subordinates or followers. Paternalism is prevalent in formal organization, especially in business organizations where greater consideration is given to status. This encourages subjectivity or emotionalism, which leads to demoralization and inefficiency. If greater consideration is attached to function, objectively is maximized in the use of standardized criteria, like the areas of recruitment, training, evaluation of performance, and promotion of personnel. Filipinos are observed to be imitative or gaya-gaya, and such imitativeness gives rise to the Persian for facade or palabras, pakitang tao, and pagyayabang. This has led Filipino to be escapists and shut their eyes to problem and postpone to some indefinite future time the performance of tasks that can be very well be done in the present. For the Filipino female, the training in the family stresses patient suffering. This results in double standard of morality and the consensus that is only the woman who has the duty to attend to the home. Number 2, personalism and impersonalism. Am I correct? Personalism and impersonalism. Personalism attaches major importance to personal factors which guarantees intimacy, warmth, and security in kinship or friendship, in getting things done. Impersonalism refers to the tendency to eliminate the influence of friendship or kinship in working situation. Behavior is depersonalized, standardized, or institutionalized. Thus, the function of a position and not of the person occupying it. Set the patterns of behavior in the group. Many Filipinos remain personalistic in spite of the rise of impersonalism in the urban areas. This is evident in the frequent charges of nepotism, favoritism, and particularism hurled against public officials. Graft and corruption had been analyzed as products of the kinship of reciprocity relation. Personalism has a deterring effect on the economic, social, and political growth of Philippine society. The Filipino way of doing is centered too much on personalities. The, indi- the inability to dis- the inability the inability to dissociate personalities from function and positions make it extremely difficult for them to be really objective in making judgments. Filipinos persist in setting matters in roundabout way. They resort to pakiusap, areglo, and lakad, which weaken the merit systems, especially in employment. Particularism and universalism. When the person's concern is centered on subgroup made up relatives, friends, colleague, associate, religious affiliates, or members of his or her regional group, that individual is called particularistic. When one's main concern is the advancement of the collective or national good, he or she is said to be universalistic. So I'm going to repeat it. Particularism and universalism, when the person's concern is centered on subgroups made up of relatives, friends, colleagues, associate, religious affiliates, or members of his ethnical regional group, that individual is called particularistic. When one's main concern is the advancement of the collective national good, he or she is said to be universalistic. In the Philippines, rules stress particularistic interests, while legal rules are universalistic, meaning these were formulated in consideration of the whole society's general welfare. The Filipino concept of tayo-tayo strongly denotes particularism. The kinship group is enlarged through ritual kinship such as marriage, baptismal, and confirmation rites. This extends the group of relatives to the compadres, ninong, bayaw, inaanak, and so on. Often Filipinos are regionalistic and generally think of themselves first and above all as members of their local region and only secondarily is as a Filipino. Number four, Filipino nationalism. Nationalism is the advocacy of making one's own nation distinct and separate from the others in the intellectual, social, cultural, economic, political, and moral matters. It is the feeling of oneness among the nationals who seek to establish the identity of the good of the nation in these matters. More than just a sentiment of love or affection or a feeling of patriotism for one's country is, what its goal is and how it is to achieve these goals. Nationalism can be factor for either evil or good. If carried to its extreme, it may take form of ethnocentrism, racism, or xenophobia. Nationalism is constructive when encourages analytical self-knowledge of the weak and strong points of the country and support the universalistic values. As a sentiment, nationalism has neither strongly swept nor deeply penetrated the entire Philippine nation. Some observers note that Filipinos suffer from national amnesia and colonial mentality. Filipinos have a strong preference for imported goods and easily adapt themselves to foreign ideas and ways. Many attribute this to our lack of national integration. However, schools, people's organizations, group and individuals are now exploring more about their cultural roots and searching for national identity. This may eventually lead to a stronger sense of nationalism. The increase in social and technological inventions has made it more difficult for any society to isolate itself from the rest of the world. Awareness and understanding of the contemporary values in society will put us in a better position to determine what we gain or lose in predominantly Gemeinschaft society, characterized by intimate, informal, reciprocal, and warm social interpersonal relations stemming from non-rationalism, personalism, and particularism, or in a predominantly Gesellschaft society characterized by anonymity, formality, contractualism, and cold arising from nationalism, impersonalism, and universalism. Sociology focused on the Philippine 4th edition, 2004. Nationalism has had a long history in our country. In our struggle for freedom, there have been periods when strong nationalists feeling fired our people to action and our periods when nationalism seems to be forgotten. Not only did nationalism as a sentiment have its peaks and valleys, nationalism as a political concept has been espoused at one time or another being by different sectors of society which projected particular nationalist goals as their own interests and historical circumstances demanded. The Ilustrados, who led the propaganda movement, were expressing the nationalist goals of the Filipino elite when they demanded reforms which would give them participation in local political rule and a greater share in economic economic benefits. The people led by Bonifacio. So where I am, the people led by Bonifacio went further than the Ilustrados. They demonstrate they demonstrated the highest nationalist fervor when they spontaneously heeded the calls of the Katipunan and fought an anti-colonial revolution against Spain. They had practically won their freedom when they were confronted by a new colonizer. Nationalism again sustained the people in their fierce resistance to American rule. Many from, many from among the masses fought for a decade more, even as most of the Ilustrado leaders changed side and collaborated with the enemy. Their goal, their ideal was independence. They equated independence with a better life. And rightly so, although they had no clear idea of the economic dimension of the independent society, they aspired for beyond the immediate demand for lands to the tillers. Nationalism at the time was mass nationalism. It was clearly anti-colonial. Its dominant goal was political independence. American colonial policy suppressed Philippine nationalism by military campaigns against resistance group, the members of which is branded as brigands or and outlaws and by the Sedition Law 1901, which imposed the death penalty or a long prison term on anyone who advocate independence from the United States, even the peaceful means. The Flag Law of 1987 prohibited the display of the Philippine flag, that symbol of Filipino nationalism, from 1907 to 1919. American public policy further undermined Filipino nationalism through the educational system, which imposed the English language as a medium of instructions, projected American society and culture as model to emulated, omitted all mention of Filipino resistance to American conquest, and the cruel suppression of the resistance inculcated the idea that Filipino must undergo tutelage in some government in self-government to deserve independence, and presented the United States as generous benefactors. So the beneficiaries of American education began to imbibe American values and culture and to like American consumer goods. The majority of the Filipinos remained faithful to the ideal of independence. Politicians, therefore, had to declare in the campaign speeches that they would work for immediate, complete, and absolute independence in order to get the people's vote. But this independence was now to be requested from the colonizer who had promised to grant it in due time. Nationalism as anti-colonialism was raised to new heights of necessity by the brutal Japanese occupation. Ironically enough, this hatred for one colonizer only increased the longing for the return of the other colonizer and our blind faith in his promises. While on while an aroused nationalism and a healthy suspicion made most Filipinos see the sham independence by Japan and correctly appraise Japan's exploitative designs on how economy and natural resources, we failed to recognize very similar policies and objectives when this came from our American friends. When our liberators demanded that we accord American citizens the same rights as Filipinos, when they asked for military and naval bases on our soil, not enough Filipinos objected. We did not see this as derogations of the sovereignty we had just regained. Our nationalist aspiration rather, were satisfied with flag independence. The economic dimension of nationalism, the economic dimension of nationalism were not yet clearly within the perspective of the majority. Soon, however, economic problems arising from reimposition of free trade and the renewed domination of our economy by foreign, mostly American corporations would make more Filipinos realize that the task of nationalism did not end with the attainment of the political independence lifted from What is Filipino Nationalism 2005. So we have here the fast fact sedition law of 1901 or the Act number 292 prohibited any Filipino from advocating Philippine independence or its separation from the United States. Enacted by the Philippine Commission headed by William Howard Taft on November 4, 1901, the Sedition Law of 1901 declared unlawful any peaceful or overt means such as speech, printing, publication, and circulation of any material that encourages the Filipino to fight against American colonial rule in the Philippines. This law imposed death penalty and or long imprisonment on many Filipino nationalist leaders. This is from the link is unreadable. Act 1696 or the Flag Act, Philippine Commission Act number 1696, August 23, 1907, is an act of Philippine Commission that outlaw the display of Katipunan flags, banners, emblems, or devices in the American-controlled Philippine Islands. Both the current national anthem, Lupang Hinirang, and the present-day flag of the Philippines were covered by this ban. The Flag Act was repealed by the Philippine legislature in 1919. So we have this the glossary, the coalesce to unite into wool, and cronyism, the practice of favoring one's close friends, especially in political appointment. Gamenschaft, personal relationship are defined and regulated on the basis of traditional social rules. People have simple and direct face-to-face relations with each other that are determined by natural will. Gesellschaft is the creation of rational will and is typified by modern cosmopolitan societies with their government bureaucracies and large industrial organization. In the Gesellschaft, rational self-interest and calculating conduct act to weaken the traditional bonds of the family, kinship, and religion that permeate the Gemeinschaft structures. In the Gesellschaft, human relations are more impersonal and indirect, rationally constructed in the interest of efficiency or other economic and political consideration. The Ilustrados constituted the Filipino educated class during the Spanish colonial period in the late 19th century. Nepotism is the practice of favoritism based on kinship. Wanton, deliberate and without motive of provocation, or this is the uncalled for, headstrong, or willful. Xenophobia is typically used to denote a phobic attitude towards foreigners or strangers, or even of the unknown race, or even of the unknown. Racism is described as form of xenophobia. So we have the reference and supplementary materials. It is from nstp Book 1, Kilang Alexander et al., Jim Saiville, Publication, Malabon City. Copyright 2015, ISBN 978-971-9676065. And Sociology Focus the Philippine, page 89 to 94, 4th edition, Panopio, Isabel, Raimundo Adelisa, Publisher and Ken Incorporated. Quezon City, copyright 2004, ISBN 971-855-8454. So we have also here what is Filipino nationalism, published May 17, 2005, and others. So that one. And that's all. Thank you for being with me. Salamat sa dalawang tagapakinig. So this is all for the Module 3, Understanding Filipino Value System. At mabuhay po tayong lahat. Paalam!